Phonics, where I've decided today we're going to cover French prepositions, which are very important to the construction of your phrases, especially in beginning level French. When I was first learning French, I struggled a lot with constructing my sentences and remembering tense or even just meanings of stuff. So I thought today would be a good idea to grasp some of those concepts. So what exactly is a preposition? A preposition is a word that typically comes before a noun or a pronoun and shows the relationship between that noun or pronoun and other words in a sentence. So prepositions often indicate location, direction, time, or the relationship between different elements in a sentence. And prepositions are an important part of language because they help provide context and clarify relationships between different parts of a sentence. So the first preposition I want to cover is a, which means to or at. This can be constructed in a lot of different ways. The masculine form is o, and the plural form is o. A l'apostrophe is for those weird words where l'hôtel, for example, is conjugated with l'apostrophe, and à la, which is the feminine construction. So a is used to indicate direction or destination. You could say je vais à l'école, which means I'm going to school. Or you could use a before a feminine country or city name, like je vais à Paris, I'm going to Paris. There's also a fun fact that steak à point is cooked to the point or just right, and there are a lot of different ways to cook meat in French, so I thought that would be a fun little side note to mention. So hors means outside of, and you can use hors to indicate something outside of a particular area or a boundary. So you could say le chat est hors de la maison, which means the cat is outside of the house. You could also use it to indicate exclusion or exception. And for example, for a little fun caveat, an hors d'oeuvre means outside of the work, which means referring to the appetizer or starter dish. There are a lot of words for food in French, like amuse-bouche, for example, but an hors d'oeuvre means just outside of the work, which the main work is the entree or meal. So very, very interesting caveat there. So the next one is par, which means by, through, or via. You could use par to indicate the agent or means by which an action is performed. For example, le livre a été écrit par l'auteur. The book was written by the author. You could also use par to indicate the method or way something is done. For example, nous sommes allés à Paris par avion. We went to Paris by plane. So next up, there's pour, which means for. You can use pour to indicate a purpose or goal, beneficiary, time or duration, or the cause or reason. For example, you can say il étudie pour réussir. He is studying in order to pass. And then, as an interesting caveat, pourquoi, the word for why in French, literally translates to for what or for why. So the next word we actually have in English. Some people say sans a person or sans money as a fancy way of saying without, and that comes from French. We use sans to indicate absence, exclusion, contrast, or to imply negativity. For example, you can say c'est un projet sans espoir, which means it's a project without hope. Next up is sous, which means under or beneath. You can use sous to indicate location, being under the influence of a person or a substance, time constraints, and shelter. So for example, le chat dort sous l'arbre, which means the cat is sleeping underneath the tree. And then as an interesting caveat, you can also say that sous is used to indicate a position or condition of being under something, whether physically, metaphorically, or in terms of authority or influence. So, for example, the people during French rule were sous l'influence de la roi, which means under the king. So sur means on or upon. Sur indicates location, surface, direction, or time. Used in a sentence, you could say, je suis sur Angers le week-end prochain. I'm in Angers next weekend. I studied abroad in Angers, so it has a really, really, really tight spot in my heart. And then, for example, Le Tranchée-sur-Mer is an example of one of the many towns that uses sur in the name to denote the proximity to water, mountains, or important places. Vers is our next word, which is indicating direction or destination, time, estimation, or comparison. If you're running through a metro station or the airport in France, you'll hear vers used a lot, as typically this is used in many transportation systems. As an interesting caveat, Buzz Lightyear, or Buzz l'éclair in French, famously says to infinity and beyond, and the most proper way to convey this is using vers, which means towards. Dans is our next word, which means in or inside. You can use dans to indicate location, time, movement, or context. For example, il y a de la tension dans la salle. There is tension in the room. Our next one is a really argumentative word. Contra means against, typically used to indicate someone's opposition to an action or their resistance to someone's thoughts or ideas. You can use contra to indicate your opposition or resistance, contact or proximity, comparing and contrasting, or protection and defense. For example, you can say, il porte un masque contre les particules fines. He wears a mask against fine particles, because COVID-19, you know. So our next phrase is à côté de, which means next to or beside. You can use à côté de to indicate location, relative position, or comparing and contrasting. For example, you can say, il habite à côté de l'école. He lives next to the school. À côté de ses pompes is an idiomatic expression, in other words, that translates to besides one's pumps, or out of sorts, which is a fun little caveat that can help you learn this phrase. Our next one is autour de, which means around. You can use autour de to indicate location, movement, or surroundings. For example, les enfants jouent autour de la table. The children play around the table. You could also, as an idiomatic expression, learn this phrase by saying tourner autour du pot, which means to turn around the pot, meaning to beat around the bush, or to avoid the main point. So this is a really, really, really awesome thing that you'll see on many French restaurants or any restaurant that you basically go to in French, using this in some way of branding. This is because it means at the house of or among. For example, Chez André is one of the many French restaurants that use chez to make their establishments feel more homely. By using chez, it indicates that one person can feel at home within the establishment, which means that eating there feels like, you know, a big part of someone's day. You can also use chez to indicate your location, belonging, a social gathering or event, or a professional capacity. For example, nous avons une soirée chez des amis ce week-end, which means we have a party at friend's place this weekend. Our next one is a very professional word, which means à l'égard de, regarding. You can use à l'égard de to indicate topic, opinion, treatment, or legalities in business meetings. For example, les droits de l'homme sont protégés à l'égard de la loi. Human rights are protected under the law. Next up is après, which means after. You can use après to indicate a sequence of events. For example, je mange après le travail, which means I eat after work. You can also use après to talk about time. Je te verrai après le dîner means I'll see you after dinner. Our next one and final one for this segment is avec, which means with. You can use avec to indicate accomplishment or accompaniment. Je vais au cinéma avec mes amis, which means I'm going to the movies with my friends. Not accomplishment, sorry, accompaniment. Next up, you also can use avec to express using something, which means je mange la soupe avec une cuillère. I eat soup with a spoon. Thank you so much for listening to this series. I really appreciate all of the support on my initial videos, and I'll see you for part 2 of this series. Make sure to like, subscribe, and sign up for any updates as well that we'll have. We'll update daily French vocab lessons, daily words, and a lot more. So stay tuned for more. Until next time on Francophile Phonics, and thanks for listening. Merci à tous et bonne journée.